Okay, we're up to chapter 3, supply and demand. There's an old economist joke. If you know the world, you know that every discipline in the world has jokes that only the people who study that discipline think are funny. So we have a neutron walks into a bar and says, "How much your drinks here?" And the bartender says, "For you, no charge." Right? Neutron, no charge. Neutron. Okay. Anyway, one of the not really funny jokes that economists say, but is kind of funny to economists, is that you don't really need economists. All you need is parrots. And you just teach the parrot to say, supply and demand. So, why are gas prices going down? Supply and demand. And it's the answer to every question, right? Supply and demand. It's funny to economists. It's really not that funny. Okay, so supply and demand is about markets and prices. Okay? It's about how our system works, how a system based on, at least theoretically, based on free markets works. It's about buyers and sellers. The trick to markets is to have lots of buyers and lots of sellers. The reason the stock market is the way it is there's lots and lots of people buying and selling stocks all the time. If you go to farmers markets, there's a whole bunch of tables set up and there's lots of people selling and there's lots of people wandering around buying. You go to fish markets, there's lots of people buying and lots of people selling. That's why this works. If I don't like what you've got on your table, I can go to another table. If I don't buy from you, somebody else maybe will. Lots of buyers, lots of sellers. Okay? So if we're asking where this applies, well, there are lots of buyers of cars, but there aren't lots of sellers. And maybe some of what predictions we make from supply and demand aren't going to work completely well in the car market because lots of buyers, not as many sellers. Farmers, on the other hand, there's lots of buyers and sellers of wheat. There's lots of buyers and sellers of produce. There's lots of buyers and sellers. So when we talk about raw commodities, now we should be in an area where we've got lots of sellers and lots of buyers, and supply and demand should make good sense there, hopefully. When we talk about jars of peanut butter in the grocery store, there's lots of buyers of peanut butter, but there aren't lots of different sellers of peanut butter, and there aren't lots of stores that sell peanut butter. So again, maybe supply and demand won't completely work when we're talking about peanut butter. The word that goes with this, or phrase, is the competitive market. Supply and demand applies in a competitive market, a market where there is strong competition. Okay? There has to be strong competition among buyers and sellers for this to work. The salaries of NFL players are not a competitive market, at least for the stars. There aren't many Aaron Rodgerses, and there aren't many Drew Breeses. Yes, the Cowboys come along, they get Dak Prescott. He turns out to be a pretty good quarterback, and now they're fighting with him. But he's a scarce commodity. There aren't very many great quarterbacks. He should get paid a lot of money. And the rules of supply and demand shouldn't apply to him because there are way more people who would like to buy him, employ him, than there are Dak Prescotts in the world. Okay? It's excuse me. It's also important to understand here that we're talking about the money prices of things, how much things cost in money. But you can also balance things out, as we've talked about before, with things for things. Okay, so one of the big things that matters that people forget about here is what we call relative prices. Consumers respond to relative prices. Relative prices. Nothing to do with your aunts and uncles. Relative price is the price of one thing compared to another thing. So if we look at the menu here for In-N-Out Burger, the double double's $3.25 and a cheeseburger's $2.25. If we do a little math there, that means one double double equals 1.44 cheeseburgers. So in effect, in theory, 1.44 cheeseburgers would buy one double double. Okay? That's the relative price. One thing compared to the other. Now, why is that important? Well, let's suppose that In-N-Out raises their price and that double double is $4 and the cheeseburger's $2.50. Well, both prices went up, but only sort of. And here's the problem. That one double double is now 1.6 cheeseburgers. The double double went up in price more than the cheeseburger went up in price. It was a 75-cent increase in the double double, only a 25-cent increase in the cheeseburger. So relatively speaking, the double double became more expensive and the cheeseburger became less expensive. The cheeseburger actually went down in price compared to the double double. Relative to the double double, the cheeseburger now has a lower price. Okay? So consumers are going to respond. They're not going to just look at this and go, hey, everything's more expensive. Yes, it is. But relatively speaking now, the cheeseburger is a bigger bargain than it was before compared to the double double. And if you really love, if I go to In-N-Out, I always get a double double, so probably might not affect me. But some people who are on the margin about whether to buy that double double or not are going to switch now to the cheeseburger because the cheeseburger is relatively less expensive than it used to be. The gap between the two things has grown. Okay? So it doesn't just matter that the cheeseburger went from $2.25 to $2.50. It also matters what the price of that double double is relative to the price of the cheeseburger. Same thing with the hamburger price. Okay? The hamburger price stays $1.95 and the cheeseburger goes to $2.50. Some people might choose to buy the hamburger instead of the cheeseburger. Okay? Hopefully we get that. Okay, so markets. Again, we talked about this a second ago. I'm going to talk about it again. I'm going to keep harping on it. Markets work when there's competition. So there's fundamental things that have to be true for a market to work correctly. And one of those things is competition. And again, competition is both with the buyers and the sellers. If during the corona thing, it is very difficult to get your hands on a video game console. They're just selling out like crazy. What happens? There's no competition among the sellers. Okay? Sometimes people try to sell things and nobody wants to buy them. There's no competition among the buyers. Or alternatively, we just talked a second ago about the fact that in the NBA or the NFL, you've got 30 teams and not 30 great quarterbacks. You only have maybe a half a dozen great quarterbacks, and those 30 teams are all going to be bidding for those quarterbacks. You have a lot more buyers than you have sellers. Same thing in the NBA. You don't have that many really championship level players, and you have a lot more teams that are trying to buy them, and it's going to drive salaries up. Sometimes the opposite is true. There are small towns all over the place where there's a little tiny town and there's one factory in the town. Well, there's one buyer of workers and lots of workers who are trying to sell their services. That one buyer doesn't have to pay a high price for those workers because there's so many workers. Okay? So for the market to work correctly, there have to be lots of buyers and lots of sellers. Then there also needs to be a lot of information in the system. As a buyer, I have to know what I'm getting. As a seller, I have to know what I'm selling. There's all the time you read that some person was at a garage sale and they bought a painting for $5, which they knew was a Picasso, and the person who sold it to them didn't know it was a Picasso, and it sells at auction for $5 million when this person paid $5 for it. The buyer and the seller have to have information. You have to know that what you're buying on eBay is actually what they claim you're buying on eBay, and that can be a problem. The sellers and the buyers have to know. When you buy a used car, you might not know the truth about that car. My roommate, when I was my second year in college, he bought a used car, and the car dealer assured him, that it had only been driven by a little old lady going to church on Sunday. And when it started having problems right after he bought it, actually, and he took it to a mechanic, and the mechanic said, this car's been rolled over, and then somebody tried to fix it. And he was like, no, I didn't know that. He wouldn't have bought the car if he had known the truth about it. Okay? So both the buyers and the sellers have to have nearly perfect information. They have to have really good information about what they're buying and selling so that it makes sense. Otherwise, the market might work wrong, and you might buy something, sell something for $5, or buy something for $5 that's worth $5 million. Or alternatively, you might spend $5 million on something only to find out that it's worthless. There's tons of fake art out there. There's tons of fake Dead Sea Scrolls and stuff that are out there that people have paid huge amounts of money for only to find out that they're worthless. Okay, so there's supply, there's demand. Let's start by talking about demand. 3 things have to be true for you to have a demand for something. You don't automatically have a demand. First, you have to want it. Second, you have to be able to afford it. You have to be able to buy it. And third, you have to plan to buy it. So you have to have a plan. So I want a Ferrari. I think I could plan to buy one, but I can't afford it. So I don't have a demand for a Ferrari because I can't afford it. I could afford Barry Manilow. I could afford to buy every Barry Manilow song on iTunes that there is. I don't want it, and I'm not going to plan to buy it. Okay? So I don't have a demand for a Ferrari, and I don't have a demand for Barry Manilow. I do have a demand for Metallica songs. I want them, I can afford them, and I plan to buy them. Okay? So whether or not you have a demand for something depends upon you want it, you can afford it, and you decide that it's worth buying for you. Okay? If Ferrari says, look, it's Enzo Ferrari's 120th birthday, and we're going to give you all Ferraris at $25,000 tomorrow only, I'm going to be buying a Ferrari, and UNLV will not see me for a while because I will be driving that Ferrari wherever I can. I will both want it, afford it, and I will more than plan to buy it. On the other hand, if iTunes sends me an email tomorrow and says, hey, one day only, all Barry Manilow songs, 1 penny each, I don't care. I'm still not buying them. I am not making a trip to iTunes to buy Barry Manilow songs at 1 cent each. And if I'm at iTunes to buy something else, I'm still not going to buy Barry Manilow songs for 1 cent each. Okay? So there are things that I can afford to buy that I don't have a demand for. There are things that I want to buy but I can't afford. For me to truly have a demand for something, I not only have to want to buy it, I have to be able to afford it, and I have to include it in my plans. Okay? You should note already in your mind that the price of these things has something really strong to do with that. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes. Okay? We have a concept called quantity demanded. The quantity demanded is the amount consumers plan to buy during a given time period at a given price. The amount consumers plan to buy during a given time period at a given price. Okay? The amount the consumers plan to buy during a given time period at a given price. So the quantity demanded, my quantity demanded of Ferraris is 0. And my quantity demanded of Barry Manilow is 0. My quantity demanded of cans of chili from the grocery store is not 0. I plan on buying some cans of chili and eating chili a little bit during the next month or whatever, okay, at whatever the given price is. If I go to the store and I was expecting to pay $1 for that can of chili and now it's $5, I'm going to buy less of it because the price has changed. It's a different price. If we talk about how much I'm going to buy for a week versus how much for a month versus how much for a year, well, those time periods are going to change the amount that I buy. Weeks and months go by and I don't buy anything. Over the course of the year, I buy a few cans of chili.